Groundhog Day by Lisa M. Herrington. This is the table of contents. Some books have a table of contents to tell you what the book contains. It means what you can find inside the pages of the book. The topics are separated into different sections, and each section has a page number where it begins. It's really helpful if a book has a table of contents, so you will know where to find all of the information in the book. Meet a furry forecaster. Will the groundhog see its shadow this year? Most people cannot wait to find out on February 2nd, which is Groundhog Day. Groundhogs are furry rodents like mice and squirrels. They are also called woodchucks. Puxatawny Phil is one of the most famous groundhogs in the United States. He lives in Pennsylvania. Shubenacadie Sam is one of Canada's most famous groundhogs. He lives in Nova Scotia. This is a photo of Shubenacadie Sam. A Groundhog's Tale. Here is how the Groundhog Day story goes. After hibernating for the winter, a groundhog comes out of its burrow. If it is cloudy, the groundhog will not see its shadow. It will stay inside. That means there will be an early spring. These groundhogs are snuggled up in their winter burrow. If the sun is shining, the groundhog will see its shadow. It will go back inside its burrow. People say that means there will be 6 more weeks of winter weather. The groundhog is one of many animals that hibernate in the winter. Of course, a groundhog cannot really tell us when spring will begin. The holiday is just pretend. By February, some people are tired of cold weather. They are ready for spring. How it began. For many years, people around the world relied on hibernating animals like groundhogs to predict the weather. Mushko the groundhog lives in western Ukraine. In the 1800s, people in the United States and Canada made Groundhog Day an official holiday. On Groundhog Day, people gather to learn the groundhog's prediction. Most groundhogs have brown fur, but some have black fur or white fur. Town officials dress up in fancy clothes. Early in the morning, the groundhog is asked for its prediction. An official puts his ear close to the groundhog. It looks like the groundhog is whispering a prediction. Happy Groundhog Day! There are lots of fun ways to celebrate Groundhog Day. People gather to watch the groundhog come out of its burrow. Others watch the news to find out if the groundhog has seen its shadow. An official blows a fanfare trumpet as the crowd waits for Groundhog Staten Island Chuck to come out. In many places, people hold Groundhog Day ceremonies to celebrate. Queen Charlotte predicts the weather in North Carolina. Some people march in parades. Others gather to listen to music and celebrate with their neighbors. In Woodstock, Illinois, people gather in the town square. They listen to music while they wait for the groundhog's prediction. Some people even dress up in costumes to celebrate. How will you celebrate Groundhog Day? These kids are wearing groundhog noses. The end. Oh, what a great book that was for us to read today. This book gave us so much information and told us all about Groundhog Day and why we celebrate and how people celebrate. Now, this book was nonfiction. That means it was a real book Remember, nonfiction means real. Real means nonfiction. That's because this story was not made up or pretend. It just gave us information all about groundhogs, Groundhog Day, and how people celebrate this fun holiday. Groundhog's Dilemma. The author is Kristen Remenar. She wrote the words. And the illustrator is Matt Faulkner. He drew the pictures. A dilemma is when you have a difficult problem. And in our story, Groundhog is definitely going to have a difficult problem to solve. Here we go. I see my shadow, Groundhog declared. Half the animals cheered, the other half groaned. 6 more weeks of winter. Back to sleep. Yay! Stuck in the nest for 6 more weeks. I'll go nuts. Another spring would have been nice. Groundhog's shoulders slumped. I just call it like I see it, he mumbled, heading back into his den for a good long nap. Spring finally arrived and everyone came out to look for food. I could have had fresh berries 6 weeks ago if someone hadn't seen his shadow. I liked wearing my white fur a bit longer this year. Thanks, Groundhoggy. I only reported what I saw. Still, I appreciate it. Have some berries. This exchange did not go unnoticed. The next morning, Squirrel stopped by for a visit. Groundhog, my pal, want to sit with me at the ball game today? I'll share my peanuts, he said. Really? Gee, thanks, replied Groundhog. Anything for a friend. Maybe next February you could return the favor by making spring come early, Squirrel suggested. Well, I don't actually control the weather. I just report it. Think it over. That afternoon, Bear clapped a paw on Groundhog's shoulder. How would you like to play catch after the game? Bear offered. I don't know. Usually you get mad because I keep dropping the ball, Groundhog said. Well, today I'm in a good mood, and if I get 6 extra weeks of sleep next year, I'll be in a good enough mood to teach you how to throw, Bear replied. Really? All I do is... Just before the game began, Sparrow called out encouragingly to Groundhog. I'm sure we can find a position for the guy who can make spring come early. Groundhog opened his mouth to protest, but he looked longingly at the team warming up. Want to play? Me? An early spring sounds good to me, Sparrow. That evening, Hare stopped by. Groundhoggy, you do like seeing me in my pretty white coat, don't you? Mm-hmm. Don't you want a longer winter next year so I can wear it for 6 extra weeks? Oh, yes. So you'll see your shadow on February 2nd. Uh-huh. Over the next several months, Groundhog's social calendar was full of ball games, picnics, and bonfires. On the first frost-covered morning in late fall, A crowd gathered at Groundhog's door.
I like my winter sleep. Don't forget early spring. An early spring means more time for baseball.
I love my winter white, Groundhoggy. As he settled in for the winter, Groundhog felt restless. One snowy night he left his den looking for help. "I'll," said Groundhog. "I need some advice. Squirrel and Sparrow wanted early spring, but Hare and Bear want a longer winter. I've said yes to everyone because I want them to like me. I don't control the weather. I just predict it."
To see or not to see your shadow? That is the question, said Owl. You've got yourself into this, Groundhog. You'll have to get yourself out. But I'd really appreciate it if you could make spring come early. Winter is tough on my old bones.
Groundhog slunk back to his den. He spent several restless weeks mulling over his options before sinking into an uneasy sleep. February 2nd dawned chilly and bleak. Groundhog looked up at the partly cloudy sky. He looked around at the expectant faces. He looked down at the ground, unsure of what he saw.
Do you see your shadow or not?
Groundhoggy. Then the sun broke free of the clouds and shone brightly. Groundhog knew that no matter what he said, spring would come when it wanted to, and either way, someone would be angry. All he could do was tell the truth. So Groundhog took a deep breath and puffed up his chest.
I see my shadow, he announced. 6 more weeks of winter.
Half the animals cheered. The other half groaned.
Hey, I thought we were friends. Oh, drat. Yes.
Yay! We are friends. You're all my friends, so I... Groundhog sighed. I promised you what you wanted, so you would stay friends with me. Groundhog hung his head. I'm sorry, everyone. I shouldn't have pretended that I could control the weather. I just call it like I see it. That's all. It's not because of your job that we're your friends.
Well, not only because of it.
Groundhog looked up at them, grumpy and hungry from months of cold. I know it doesn't make what I did right, but maybe you'd like to join me for hot chocolate and snacks? He asked. 6 weeks will go by faster with a full stomach. With some grumbling and squeezing, everyone joined Groundhog. They ate, talked, and laughed until they were stuffed and sleepy again.
Back to the den.
A sparrow, Groundhog said. I know you're angry, but I'd still like to play baseball with you in the spring. Sparrow smiled.
I could use a good umpire.
Groundhog grinned. I'll call it like I see it. 6 weeks later. Play ball! Groundhog's Day Off. Written by Rob Pearlman. Illustrated by Brett Helquist. Every year, on one special day in February, Groundhog wakes up extra early. Crowds of people gather outside, locals, tourists, even the mayor. News reporters with large microphones and big shiny teeth are waiting. Every year, they ask Groundhog the same things. Are there going to be 6 more weeks of winter?
Is spring around the corner?
But the one thing they never ask Groundhog is about him. No, how are you feeling? No, have you seen any good movies lately? No, do you like mushrooms on your pizza? Not even, who does your fur? Groundhog has more to offer than the forecast. But that's what happens every year. Well, not this year.
There, people. I am a groundhog with feelings and things to say. But all you care about is the weather, so this year I'm going on vacation. You'll have to find someone new. Sincerely, Groundhog. P.S. I'm taking my shadow with me.
Groundhog packed his robe, slippers, magazines, and shadow and headed for the spa. The townspeople didn't know what to do. The mayor thought long and hard and finally announced, "We'll hold auditions for a new groundhog." Lots of animals wanted to try out for the role. Groundhog audition. Elephant was just too big. Ostrich got the whole thing backwards. Monkey was asked to leave after an unfortunate banana cream pie incident. Bats, owls, moles, and possum schedules didn't work. Poor Puppy suffered from stage fright. And Sheldon, well, his shadow just wouldn't behave. "This is terrible," the mayor cried. "There's only one animal right for this job." Groundhog had been relaxing when he heard a news report. Nobody has Groundhog's flair for the dramatic. Nobody can wake up as early as he does. No one, the mayor said, pausing, is as special as Groundhog. Groundhog couldn't believe his ears.
They do think of me as more than just a weather vane.
And with that, he threw on a towel and whistled for a taxi.
Take me home.
Groundhog tunneled under the stage and popped out of the hole.
Ta-da!
The audience stood and cheered. Woo! Yay! Woohoo! The reporters asked Groundhog all the questions he had always hoped they would ask.
Where did you go on vacation?
Which team are you rooting for in the playoffs? Do you prefer chunky or smooth peanut butter?
Is that your real fur?
Will you do this for real tomorrow?
Groundhog stopped signing autographs.
Tomorrow?
He said. The reporters nodded. Tomorrow is Groundhog Day. You came back just in time.
Well, then, no time to talk. I have to go to bed early.
The next morning, Groundhog woke up extra early. He poured himself a cup of warm mint tea and peeked out of his hole. And this time, the reporters asked him about much more than the weather. What would we do without you? Bagels or donuts? What would you do with $1 million?
Seriously, is that fur your real fur?
Exclusive. Groundhog tells all. You like me. You really like me. Groundhog said with a huge smile. He finally felt like everyone cared about him. He was very happy. That is, until he climbed back down into his hole, turned on the television, and saw that Bunny had hopped away. I quit. Auditions would be held in the spring. The end. Look, Bunny and Groundhog have gone on vacation together. What a great book. Groundhog Day by Gail Gibbons. Groundhog Day is celebrated on February 2nd. Some people believe that on this day of the year, watching groundhogs can help predict when spring will come. When will spring begin? The date of February 2nd is about the middle of the winter. Old stories say that if a groundhog sees its shadow on this date, there will be about 6 more weeks of winter. Those stories also say that if a groundhog doesn't see its shadow, spring will come early. Groundhog Day grew out of old customs and beliefs. Some ancient people celebrated a spring festival in early February. Many people cleaned their houses and the area where they lived, getting ready for a new beginning, the new spring season. Then, about 1500 years ago, people in Europe began lighting candles in the early spring for a new religious celebration. This practice coincided with the older observations that celebrated the end of winter and the beginning of spring. People had always thought that they could predict when spring would come by watching animals. They believed that if a hibernating animal awoke from its sleep in the beginning of February and saw its shadow, there would be several more weeks of winter. To hibernate means to rest and sleep during the winter. If the animal didn't see its shadow, spring would come soon. They watched animals such as hedgehogs, bears, and badgers. When Europeans were coming to North America, some settled in Pennsylvania. They brought with them the tradition of predicting spring by watching animals. Many groundhogs lived in this region. Groundhogs are animals that hibernate. It seemed logical to choose groundhogs to predict when spring would arrive. Early in February, people watched groundhogs to find out whether they did or didn't see their shadows. This custom became a yearly celebration in many places, including the town of Puxatawney, Pennsylvania. Then, in 1886, Clymer Fraze wrote in the town newspaper that February 2nd would be called Groundhog Day. In Puxatawney, the special groundhog is always called Puxatawney Phil. There have been many Puxatawney Phils. Every year on February 2nd, thousands of people show up at Gobbler's Knob just outside of Puxatawney to find out if Phil will see his shadow. High up on a stage, Phil is kept in a burrow under a fake tree stump. The town officials are also up on the stage. At exactly 7:25 a.m., Phil is taken out of his burrow. Everyone cheers. If Phil sees his shadow, winter will be longer. If he doesn't see a shadow, spring will come sooner. The officials make it look as if Phil whispers to one of them whether or not he has seen his shadow. It's all pretend. Sometimes Phil is right, other times he is wrong. Lots of people think Groundhog Day is fun. A groundhog is a furry rodent. It is a mammal that can weigh between 5 and 10 pounds. It usually grows to about 20 inches long and has a short tail and short legs. Many people think a groundhog is cute when it waddles around. Like other rodents such as mice, squirrels, and beavers, groundhogs have large front teeth that grow continuously. To help wear them down, groundhogs gnaw on, bite, and eat twigs and branches. Their diet also includes leaves, flowers, and berries. Groundhogs are found in parts of the United States and Canada. They live alone in burrows that they dig out with their sharp, curved front claws. Some burrows can be as deep as 6 feet and spread out more than 30 feet. Since they are prey to many animals, groundhogs stay close to home, usually near one of the entrances to their burrows. When outside their burrows, they may sit up straight with their front paws held tightly against their chests, eating and watching for any sign of danger. When danger is near, groundhogs make a sharp, high-pitched whistle to warn other groundhogs. Some of their natural enemies are wolves, foxes, and birds such as hawks. During the summer, groundhogs eat as much as they can to increase their body fat. In the fall, they go into their burrows to hibernate through the cold winter months. Throughout the winter, their fat provides nourishment to keep them alive. To save energy, their body temperature drops and their breathing and heart rate slow down. In some parts of the United States and Canada, groundhogs poke their tiny noses out of their burrows during February, about the middle of winter. Male groundhogs look for female groundhogs around this time and they mate. About 30 days later, the females give birth to their litters of tiny blind kits. In the northern areas, all this happens much later. For the first month, the mother groundhogs take very good care of their young. When the kits are about 1 month old, they open their eyes and begin to crawl about. There are usually 4 or 5 kits, also called cubs, in a groundhog litter. When the young groundhogs are about 2 months old, they are able to leave their mothers to dig their own burrows. A new generation of groundhogs is ready to care for itself. People enjoy Groundhog Day. Sometimes children draw pictures of groundhogs, have snacks, and play games such as shadow tag. People read stories to children about Groundhog Day, like I'm reading the story to you. Puxatawny Phil is the big star. People wait to find out whether or not Phil will see his shadow. There are other famous groundhogs too. General Lee in Atlanta, Georgia. Sir Walter Raleigh, Raleigh, North Carolina. Staten Island Chuck in New York City. Shubenacadie Sam in Nova Scotia. Weirton Willie in Weirton, Ontario. Dunkirk Dave in Dunkirk, New York. Jimmy's Sun Prairie, Wisconsin. Balzac Billy in Balzac, Alberta. Unadilla Bill in Unadilla, Nebraska. And Chuck Wood in Los Angeles, California. Often, gardeners and farmers think groundhogs are pests because they eat their vegetables. Other people think groundhogs are good at tilling the soil when they dig their burrows. Even though groundhogs are not native to every region, people all over the United States and Canada celebrate Groundhog Day. The end. Wow, that story taught us so much all about groundhogs and Groundhog Day. That was so interesting. I wonder what will happen this Groundhog Day on February 2nd. Will the groundhog see its shadow or will it not? Will we have a long winter or will spring come early? I guess we'll have to wait to find out. Gretchen Groundhog, it's your day. It was a dark and snowy night. Gretchen Groundhog sat in her burrow worrying. In a few days it would be February 2nd, when the world would be watching the little town of Piccadilly. On that day, for the first time, Gretchen would step from her burrow to stand before TV cameras, newspaper reporters, tourists, all the townsfolk, and a brass band. Everyone would be waiting as Gretchen looked for her shadow. For as long as she could remember, it had been Great Uncle Gus who searched for his shadow before the anxious crowd. If he saw it, there would be a roar of disappointment, for this meant winter would last 6 more dreary weeks. The band would play slow, sad music, and Gus would trudge back into his burrow. If there was no shadow, the band would play a lively tune, and everyone would hug and cheer. Spring was around the corner. But now, Great Uncle Gus was too old. It was up to Gretchen, his only relative, to carry on.
I can't do it,
Gretchen told her great uncle.
I'm just too shy. I can't stand there with everyone looking at me.
You can do it, said Great Uncle Gus. The first time is always the hardest.
But Gretchen knew she could not go out. Gretchen's not going out! The news flashed through Piccadilly. What will we do? The townsfolk asked each other. On January 30th, there was a story about Gretchen on the front page of the Post.
Piccadilly puzzled,
the headline said. The story continued.
There has always been a Groundhog Day in Piccadilly, but this year it seems Gretchen Groundhog will not go out. How will we plan if we do not know when winter will end?
The townsfolk stopped Gretchen on the street. They peppered her with questions.
Should we buy more salt to put on icy roads?
Asked the mayor.
A father asked, Shall I chop more wood for my family?
When can the bear stop hibernating?
Asked a little boy. Please, everyone begged, please, dear Gretchen, go out on Groundhog Day. Tell us when winter will end. But Gretchen only shook her head. On January 31st, Gretchen lit a cheery fire, but it did not help her mood. All day the doorbell chimed, the phone rang, email erupted, and urgent letters plopped through the mail slot. Gretchen felt terrible. It seemed like the longest day of her life. On February 1st, the town was in an uproar. Tourists filled the motels, In front of Gretchen's burrow, carpenters were building wooden stands for the crowd. The TV crews had arrived, and the band was practicing with squawky sounds. Groundhog Day was only hours away.
"Piccadilly panicked," read the post. "Soon the eyes of the world will be upon us. What will happen if Gretchen does not go out?"
Three townsfolk were waiting when Gretchen opened her door.
"You must try, Gretchen," said the town historian. "There has always been a Groundhog Day in Piccadilly."
"Do, Gretchen. I'll stand beside you," said the chief of police.
"I'll make you famous,"
said the editor of the Post. But Gretchen only shook her head. All afternoon and evening, visitors came.
"Gretchen, are you there?
Gretchen! That night, weary and sad, Gretchen fell asleep in her rocking chair. But she heard the townsfolk even in her dreams. "Please, Gretchen,
Open the door."
Gretchen awoke, but the knocking did not stop. She hurried to the door and looked out the peephole. There on the moonlit snow stood a little girl. It was Hester, the town historian's daughter.
"May I come in?"
Hester asked. Gretchen opened the door. She helped Hester take off her coat, soggy mittens, and wet boots and muffler.
"I won't stay long,"
Hester said.
"I wanted you to see these. I found them while I was helping my mother."
She held out a wooden box with some yellowed pieces of paper in it. Gretchen could see that they had old-fashioned writing on them.
"What's this?"
Gretchen asked.
"Records from our town history,"
Hester explained. While Great Uncle Gus made cups of steaming cocoa, Gretchen studied the first piece of paper.
"Tomorrow I must go out,"
it read,
"to stand before the Pilgrims and the Indians. I am greatly afeard."
It was signed, Goody Groundhog. Gretchen was amazed.
"Goody Groundhog lived a long time ago. She came to America on the Mayflower before there was a Piccadilly."
My mother says Goody told everyone the second winter would be better than the first, said Hester. They were very glad. Gretchen leafed through the papers.
"Here's one by George Groundhog at Valley Forge," she exclaimed. "He says,
"I am frightened to go out, but I shall. The winter has been long and hard. The soldiers must know what will be."
My mother says George told them the winter would go on a long time, said Hester. Everyone was very sad. As Gretchen read through the papers, she became more and more excited. There was a page from brave General Grant Groundhog, who had fought in the Civil War, and Jean Groundhog, the tough cowboy, and Gloria Groundhog, who became a movie star.
"They were all afraid to go out,"
Gretchen said. She read the last piece of paper.
"I am scared, but tomorrow I will try to go out,"
it said. It was signed,
Gus Groundhog. "You?"
said Gretchen to Great Uncle Gus. Her great uncle looked surprised. Then a dreamy look came into his eyes.
"It was so long ago I had forgotten about it," he said. "Now I remember. I couldn't eat or sleep the night before."
"What happened then?"
asked Gretchen.
"My great uncle Grover helped me," said Gus. He said you can do it, Gus. The first time is always the hardest.
The clock began to chime. 9, 10, 11, 12. They counted together. Oh my gosh, I've got to go, Hester said. I've never stayed up so late.
Thank you for everything, Hester,
Gretchen said. She and Hester gave each other a big hug. Gretchen went to bed and lay quietly in the darkness. She thought about the next morning, about all the townsfolk gathered, the TV cameras and the crowds, the blaring of the band. She turned on the light, wrote a few lines on a piece of paper, and put it in the history box. Then she closed her eyes and fell asleep. Gretchen's dreams were peaceful. She was awoken by the sound of voices and the squeaks of the band tuning up. She put on her coat and muffler, boots and mittens. She took a deep breath.
You can do it,
she whispered to herself. Then Gretchen Groundhog flung open the door and stepped out into the February morning. The end. Wow, what a great story. I loved it. Just like I told you, this is fiction. It's pretend, it's made up, it's fake. Groundhogs don't really talk and wear clothes and walk around like a person. But it was a great example of what happens on Groundhog Day. Even though we know groundhogs can't talk and write letters, they do come out on February 2nd, and we watch them to see if they will see their shadow or not. And then we like to pretend that that will tell us if we're going to have a winter that's going to last 6 more weeks or if the warm spring weather is on its way. It's so much fun. I wonder what will happen this Groundhog's Day. We'll have to wait till February 2nd to find out. Groundhog Day by Betsy Lewin. It's February 2nd, Groundhog Day. Everyone is waiting for Phil the groundhog to wake up and come out of his burrow. If it's cloudy, Phil won't see his shadow and he will stay outside. That means spring will come soon. If it's sunny, Phil will see his shadow. He will go back inside his burrow and there will be 6 more weeks of winter. But Phil is still asleep in his dark, warm bed. Suddenly, Phil is lifted up high in the air. Everyone cheers. Then Phil is on the cold ground. He takes a few steps and looks around. No shadow. He sees lots and lots of feet, but no shadow. He looks up and sees a cold gray sky, but no shadow. The crowd shouts, "Hooray!" Phil does not see his shadow. Spring is on the way. Phil hears a big click. A light flashes. The light makes a shadow. "Eek!" squeaks Phil. He dives back into his burrow. All these years, people thought it was the weather. Now we know the truth. Phil is afraid of his shadow. The end. What do you think? Do you think that's what really happens? That the groundhog is afraid of his shadow? I don't know if that's what really happens, but it was a funny story, and I'm glad we got to read it together. Thanks for watching. If you love this book and want a copy of your very own, you can get one at the link below. If you had fun reading along with me, please like this video. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel and check out all the other videos where I read books aloud just for you. I hope I'll see you guys soon and you'll come back and read with me again next time. Bye!